Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Is there a book in you longing to be born? Is putting your life and spiritual experience into words for an article, blog, or sharing on social media calling to you? What inspiration may you call upon to guide you through this process? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Laurie Sue Brockway, says that muse may be found with the ancient Egyptian goddess of writing, Sheshat. Laurie Sue Brockway has been publishing for more than 40 years and has written extensively on spirituality, the goddess, self-esteem, emotional health, relationships, and weddings. She has published thousands of articles and more than 25 books on these subjects, including her landmark book on the feminine divine, The Goddess Pages. An ordained interfaith minister, she's presided over a multicultural wedding ministry based in New York for more than 25 years. Her website is revlauriesue.com, and she joins me this week to share her path and latest book about the Egyptian goddess of writing, She Who Scrivens. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Laurie Sue Brockway. Welcome, Laurie Sue.
Hello, Victor.
Thank you for coming back and joining us. And for our listeners who do not know, Laurie Sue is the first face that I see in the morning and the last face that I see at night. She is my beloved partner and wife, and we've been together for many, many years. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, Laurie Sue, please share with us your path from journalist to author to interfaith minister and now publisher.
Well, it was a bit of a zigzaggy path, but I will say that from the time I was a teenager, I wanted nothing more than to be a reporter. It was the job that called to me and that I pursued as a young cub reporter at the Brooklyn paper. And I began writing for newspapers, and then I started getting magazine assignments. And I just sort of, worked my way along that field, always writing and always being connected to a publication. We didn't have the internet back then, and we wrote on that medieval device called a typewriter. And I just continued to pursue that path until I had become national editor of a couple of national magazines. And when my dad passed away, I was looking for something more spiritual to pursue. And I just decided to enroll in the Interfaith seminary, known as the New Seminary. It just changed my path, but in the very beginning, I thought I had to give up writing and journalism to be a minister, and I had a very dear friend named Father Paul Keenan, a friend to both of us, and he was a radio minister, and he worked for the Archdiocese, and he had a church, and he said to me, "You don't have to give up writing. You just make it part of your ministry." And I just began this journey of writing spiritual books. The way I taught myself how to write books in the 90s was I began by editing sexy novels for a company that was a couple of blocks away from my old apartment in Manhattan. And eventually they gave me my own book contracts. And so I wrote steamy romance books and continued to stay in publishing, but change the kind of content I was writing. And then, of course, about 7 years ago, I went back to the steamy romance writing on top of the spiritual writing because I really love doing both.
But talk a little bit about the path to interfaith ministry.
My path to interfaith ministry began with my very deep interest in goddess spirituality and in performing interfaith weddings. When you go into ministry, you think you're going for one thing and then it becomes something else. Because I had buried my dad and had officiated his funeral, I thought I was going to be doing funerals. And the thing I got called to was weddings. I loved my seminary experience, but I was not 100% satisfied with the information provided about the divine feminine. And every time I walked into a classroom, I would be sitting there waiting, listening. Where's the goddess? And first of all, I didn't even know there was a goddess for sure. I didn't know if you if you believed in a goddess or you even wanted to learn about a goddess. I thought maybe the male god would strike you down or you'd be smited for thinking about things like that. So as a seminarian, I was really grappling with my spirituality, which is something we're supposed to do, and really looking for ways to include the divine feminine, because I just thought if there's God, there's got to be goddess. And if there's so many cultures in this world that include the divine feminine, why wouldn't she be part of our normal vernacular? And why would she not be part of our spiritual existence? So that was a big part of my searching for the Divine Mother.
Your wedding ministry is very expansive and inclusive. How did you learn about performing interfaith marriages with so many different faiths and cultures?
I immersed myself in the culture that's available in New York. And I did it by going to restaurants from different cultures and talking to the people who owned and worked at the restaurants. I went to every museum exhibition I could related to anything cultural or spiritual or religious. I went on pilgrimages to different houses of worship. Part of that was part of our training as interfaith ministers, but I continued it. And there were certain cultures that really called to me, like Hinduism. And I spent 2 years back and forth sitting on the floor next to the Lakshmi icon in the temple, watching how people worship and pray and how they connect with the divine. And everybody knows I used to take cabs everywhere. I talked to every single cab driver I ever got in a cab with, because they, so many people from so many cultures. And I would ask them about their religion and about their weddings and about their celebrations. And in the very beginning, really at least the first 10 years of my ministry, I did any possible wedding I could to learn, to serve people and also to learn everything I could about any kind of wedding ceremony. And so, part of it is we are trained, and we had wonderful teachers at the new seminary when I graduated in 1999 who taught about how to do wedding ceremonies and how to work with couples. But the real training comes when you're out there with the couples and you're talking to people who come from different worlds, and then you talk to their families and you try to figure out, how do we honor everybody? How do we include everyone? How do we celebrate culture? How do we celebrate religion? When is it appropriate to leave certain things out? And it just became a beautiful journey of working with hundreds and hundreds of couples who taught me so much, them and their parents and their families and the other people I would meet at the weddings after the wedding who would talk to me about their experience with interfaith weddings or telling me that they'd never seen a wedding like that before. It was really just a beautiful experience of being in the world of weddings with so many couples.
And what has your interfaith wedding ministry taught you about the nature of love?
Well, I think the number one thing is that love is love is love, and love and soul and soulmates are not formed based on religious beliefs and culture, sexuality, or any kind of gender identification or lack of choosing to identify in any way. love is the connection of souls. And I think one of the things I really learned from marrying couples from so many vast and differing backgrounds is that people who are meant to be together find each other. And they do have to get over some of the hurdles and some of the experiences and some of the things that happen on our earth walk that make it difficult to be together. But ultimately, they're called together by this soul connection. And it's very deep. And I think it's one of the reasons interfaith weddings and multicultural pairings and blending of souls from all backgrounds is so much a part of our world today.
You had mentioned that in attending classes with the new seminary, you were looking for the goddess for the feminine divine. What drew you to study and pursue the feminine divine?
Well, I think I have to hearken back to the first thing that came into my life that really said to me, there is a goddess. And it was something called the Goddess Oracle by Sofia Maranczynski with art by Hannah Janto. And they sent me I forget who published it originally, but I was an editor at Single Living at the time. And somebody sent me that deck of cards. And I was in such a transitional time in my life, and I was trying to figure out who I was. And my father had just died. The magazine I was working on was starting to fold. And, there were so many challenges with raising a kid who had special needs. And this goddess deck came into my life. And there were, I think there were 40 or 50 goddesses in there. And I was stunned. I had no idea. It's like, who knew there was a goddess and who knew there were so many goddesses? And when I started working with that deck and just learning about the goddesses, and then I connected with the author and the artist at one point, I thought this is something that really resonates with me, that if we see ourselves as having a physical connection to the divine, that God is not just male, that God is not just in the form that we've seen it in traditional religions that we're raised with, that we can see the divinity in ourselves. And I thought that was particularly important for women who suffer so greatly from self-esteem issues. I think the goddess is for everyone, but in the initial entry to that world, I really saw her as a way to help women love themselves and celebrate themselves.
And that led to your landmark book on the feminine divine, The Goddess Pages. Please tell us about the Goddess Pages.
Well, of course, the first version was called A Goddess is a Girl's Best Friend, and it was published by Penguin Publishers. I was very blessed to have my friend Ariel Ford and her husband, Brian Hilliard, who at the time were agents and had a company. They supported me and brought me to Penguin with this idea. Originally, it was supposed to be a book called Lakshmi is a Girl's Best Friend. And my wonderful young editor said to me, well, can Lakshmi help people do this? And wanted to give Lakshmi like 50 different roles to play in the life of readers who she estimated to be in their 20s. I said, what if I just make it, what if I give you 50 goddesses who do different things so that it's not all on Lakshmi? And she said, yeah, that's great. And she said to me, I'm definitely seriously considering this. And the editor, Jennifer Repo, I said, why don't I come and do a little goddess ritual for your friends so you could just kind of see what the book may be about. And I went and I did this ritual called Reclaiming Eve, which is the first chapter. And I got a book contract. And of course, I was writing that book for about 9 months. And it's not that easy. It wasn't that easy to write that book. It was my first spiritual book. We had 9/11 happen around the time that the book was due. I had to get a little bit of an extension on it because I realized that the world was changing and I needed to include more goddesses who help us and save us, like Kuan Yin and Tara for safety and Durga from the Hindu tradition. And so I took a little extra time to add in a whole section of warrior and protection goddesses. And it turned into a book that really, it was, I guess, my best-selling book back then. And that book has gone through a few different lives. Llewellyn bought it at one point, and then they gave me back the rights, and I republished her as the Goddess Pages. And I think this is one of the things I love about publishing, is that a book never has to die. You know, we have cuneiform tablets from 30,000 years ago that still have important messages. And I thought, well, the Goddess Pages still has important messages, and people still like to read it and buy it. So that book has had quite a history. It's now celebrating its 20th year.
Congratulations. That's absolutely wonderful. So that leads us to your new book entitled She Who Scrivens, about the Egyptian goddess of writing. Who is she?
Well, Sheshat is the Egyptian goddess of writing, but also of measurement and numbers, because to Sheshat, everything is a measurement. Words are measurements too. And she played a really important role in the creation of the temples in ancient Egypt, and was responsible for what they call stretching the cord. And she was the one who worked with the pharaoh and the priests. It was her support that was called upon to measure the parameter of where a temple should be placed. And this was done in exact approximation to various astrological and astronomical aspects, which I am not an expert in, but I know that it was believed that she was directly responsible for the creation of many temples being placed in many auspicious areas. Also, she was, in every aspect of her being, has always been a goddess of writing and words and wisdom, and supporter of scribes. And she was known as, she had many, many different names. And I have to say that one of her names was She Who Scrivens, which means she who writes, which is why the book is called She Who Scrivens. So she's known by many different names, but she's always supported scribes. There is not a lot of data that I can find at this point about female scribes in Egypt. I know there were many female scribes in Mesopotamia, but the scribes in ancient Egypt seem to be male, and they work with Thoth and Sheshat. And Sheshat was the one who was called upon to help find the words and help find the spiritual words and help define things and help explain things and help scribes be inspired to do their work. As Lady of the House of Life, she was in the position of direct support of the training of scribes. And the House of Life was something that was part of ancient Egypt that was a combination of library and training ground, a point of historical reference and insight and information. And they were created by pharaohs, and they were positioned in many communities in ancient Egypt. And they were always, even if there was a different deity that was in charge of some of the House of Lives, there was also an addition of Sheshat or Thoth, because they were the main scribal god and goddess. And Sheshat is the only female deity that you will see with a scribal palette in hand, or it looks like a stylus writing on a reed, and she always has a 7-pointed star on her head.
And does Sheshat have the same power as Thoth, or Tahuti, as he's also called?
I believe so. And I'm sure there are people that might have different opinions. And from my perspective, and from what I can find historically, she was a goddess unto herself. And I have found it a little bit challenging to figure out really what her relationship is to Thoth. And I imagine that it may have changed in different time periods. We've also imbued it with our own interpretation, but some people say that Thoth is Shushat's father, and some people say that she is his partner. And Thoth is also often partnered, platonically partnered, with the goddess Maat, who is the goddess of truth. You know, it's a little unclear, but she comes from a big family of Egyptian deities, and she is the only one who's a scribe. I believe that she really stands in her own power. I have found many historical images of her on temple walls through my research, where she's standing alone or with a pharaoh, or in some cases she is with Thoth. And so they are partners in scribal duties in some cases. And you'll see this sometimes in the images on the temple walls or the funerary walls related to pharaohs, because it was believed that a pharaoh was honored in his afterlife by having his name written into the tree of life by Shushat and Thoth. And it was also believed that if Shushat recorded your deeds, then you would go on to a good, if she recorded your good deeds, you'd go on to a good afterlife. And part of her responsibility as a deity was to record the deeds and the booty, they called it, and the winnings, and the accomplishments of a pharaoh. So that was recorded for his journey into the afterlife. There's a beautiful image of her at the Brooklyn Museum in New York where she's seated in that image. It's rare to find her seated. And she's actually recording history of the pharaoh. She has been historically a goddess unto herself. She is not required to have a consort to function. And but she's sometimes paired with Thoth.
And my guest this week on Vox Novus is my partner, Laurie Sue Brockway. Her book, She Who Scrivens. Laurie Sue, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Well, my books are all over the place in online venues like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you can go to my website at revlauriesue.com for more information and links.
And we'll be back with more of Laurie Sue and She Who Scrivens after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Look out, world, we're getting strong. The future's here and we belong. She can STEM, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Or clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Oh, she can STEM, so can you. Find a cure, invent something new. There's no challenge in the world that she can't face. She can STEM.
Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn. But not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is my partner and wife, Laurie Sue Brockway. We're talking about her new book, She Who Scrivens. Laurie Sue, there's a beautiful portrait of Shushat on the front cover of the book. Tell us about that image.
Well, I was on a bit of a journey in Glastonbury, England, really coming into a greater awareness of my connection to the goddess in many forms. And during a meditation that was up at the Tor, which is a classic aspect of Glastonbury, this vision of Shushat came to me. She was holding an orange rock and she had a star on her head. When the meditation ended, I immediately went and searched her on the internet and I realized she was the goddess of writing. And of course, I was in the middle of this very big project that I had taken on of putting all my older books back into print and writing new books that led me to publish 16 books in a very short amount of time. And I started to feel the call of this goddess and wanted a piece of devotional art to help me connect to her because it was hard to find a statue of Shushat back then. And there are a few more now on the internet, but back then there weren't really statues. There were different renderings. And so I reached out to this artist I'd met in Glastonbury named Nick Phillips, and his company is Nick Phillips Sacred Art, and he's just a beautiful soul, and he literally channels deities and divine beings in his art, and he will do that for people individually. And so I had a conversation with him, and by then I had decided I was going to teach a course called She Who Scrivens. In this conversation with him, I said, I think this could be a book cover too. So we started talking about it a little more and we decided we're going to start with the devotional image. And when he sent me the first rendering of it, I was just really blown away and mesmerized. And I said, that is my book cover. And I ended up doing 3 books with the same cover because I love that cover so much. We did She Who Scrivens, Shushat Journal, and a Shushat notebook. That image came out of my communication to Nick about how I saw this goddess as a support system to me, bringing in both the ancient and the modern aspects. He channeled her in. If you look at the wall behind the book, it looks like a classic ancient Egyptian wall with the classic ancient Shushat with her star on her head. But you will also see an owl and a computer and different writing utensils that I had asked him to put in. And she's writing with a feather pen. And there's a star on her head that's connecting to the universe and all that is. And she's just a beautiful woman. It looks like a beautiful woman connected to the cosmos. So I fell in love with that art. He did such a beautiful job with it. And I later discovered that there was a book called The Once and Future Star. Got a copy of the book. It's by George Michanowski, who's now passed away, but he was a linguist and he was an expert on Mesopotamia. And he started studying this great Stella Nova explosion that happened in the universe about 10,000 years ago. And he stated in his book, and then later in a New York Times article, that he believed that writing came to the planet in an explosion of stars. I had no idea about that before I had that conversation with Nick about the cover, in which I said to him, I thought that there should be a star on her head as if she was a priestess of Shushat that was connected to the universe. I realized afterwards that what I was trying to get at was that we are all connected to the universe. And for writers, we are connected to Shushat if we choose to be. It's not like we have to invent a way to connect with her. If we just sort of can find a way to get to know her and sit in her presence, I believe that the information literally comes from the stars above as we're grounded or to the earth below. And our insight, inspiration comes through to us without a block.
Why is she especially helpful to writers and women writers in particular?
Well, first of all, I've been a writer for about 43 years, maybe longer if you consider junior high school or high school. And it is hard to write. I don't find it so hard anymore, but I have spent a lifetime, struggling to get words out, especially when you're writing stuff that you're not that in love with, and you're just trying to do your job as a writer or reporter or editor. But what happens when people get stuck in the loop of writing failure or writing lack of success or writing stiflement, or some people like to call it writer's block, is people start giving themselves messages about how they can't do it, how they shouldn't do it, how they're the worst writers in the world. Writers just really beat up on themselves a lot. And I think we need muses. I mean, the ancients had actual muses that they called to, and the muses actually are in She Who Scrivens too, because I have a chapter on additional muses that you can call upon. But Shushat is a writing goddess. She exists in this world to connect us to writing and our scribal powers and measurement. And, a lot of writers write by measurement. They say, I'm going to do 2,000 words today. I'm going to write a book that's 50,000 words. And so she is just a wonderful role model and a divine presence who literally, I believe, can literally help you get words on the page.
And how does she help women?
I think anytime women can have a divine feminine role model, that it helps us. And, as I talked about in the goddess pages, we have many, many, many different role models and divine, feminine, powerful presences that are available to us in our lives. And Shushat is just a presence and an energy and a divine source that shows women that they can connect to powerful writing and be sacred writers. She's not the only source, but I believe that she is particularly helpful to people who may see themselves as scribes or spiritual writers or people who have spiritual missions that they want to put into books. But I don't think she's only for women. I think that she serves and she's there for everyone.
What called you to write She Who Scrivens?
Well, it was an interesting experience because I started to get so involved in my studies in Glastonbury, England, and I had found my way there through the Goddess Conference. And I decided to offer a class to the Goddess Conference. And I was new to that community, but I had this idea to do a class called She Who Scrivens. This was after I had such a strong connection to Shushat in numerous meditations and classes and trainings. So they said, yes, we'd love you to do this class. So as you know, because you edited it, edited the video for 20 hours with me, and I had worked on the recordings for 20 hours, I ended up creating this 2.5-hour course. That's what the contract was for. It was called She Who Scrivens and Publishes, Being the Queen of Your Own Creativity. It was in the creation of this course that I literally was writing it, it was becoming a book. So I was able to get the Shushat journal and the Shushat notebook out in time for the Goddess Conference, but I still had another book to do. So I worked for many months putting all the content that I had shared in that 20 hours of recording and 20 hours of editing and put it into its own book. So it's both an amazing, I think it's a really good book for anybody who wants to connect with Shushat for sure. And anybody who has an urge or desire or really a true calling to write a spirituality book, particularly goddess spirituality. I kind of geared it toward those writers because there's not a lot of information or insight for them in typical writing books. And it's a book for spiritual people who would like to take a spiritual approach to writing. So it started with a class, but I always knew it would be a book because we had figured out once I got the beautiful art from Nick, we realized it was, going to be a book series.
Is everyone capable of being inspired to write a spiritual book?
I do believe that's true. And I'm going to say that the goddesses favor those who are sincere and who have a important message to get out. I think one of the places you won't find Shushat is in competition or in places where the information is not sincere. She really is a supporter of scribes and people who want to share spiritual wisdom in an appropriate way. But can anyone be inspired? Yes, anyone can be inspired. Can anyone write a book? I think it is possible. I also know, as someone who's ghostwritten a lot of books for people, not everybody who has a great inspiration has all the tools to write the book, which is why I try to explain some very, very basic fundamentals about putting a book together in She Who Scrivens. But I think, the main thing is that there has to be a level of discipline also to get the words on page. And a writing plan.
How may someone with a great idea, but not much experience, begin writing?
Well, I think the first thing to do is just sit down and see what comes out. One of the biggest challenges that writers face when they want to write a book or story when they're new at it is they get really perfectionist about what comes out. And the best way to write is to just sit and write. Literally just let words come out, even if they're stupid or weird or angry or don't make sense. It's really kind of that free association to just free. If you were taking voice lessons, you'd be singing weird sounds and making weird noises to open up your throat. And because that's what I did when I took singing lessons. It may not be the way it is anymore, but you have to exercise. And that's true with writing too. And, don't sit down and think, okay, I'm going to write my book right now. And just sit down and say, I'm going to just noodle around with writing a little bit and see what happens.
Is there a particular process or formula for beginners to follow?
Well, the first thing is I strongly urge people to give themselves the space to figure out what they want to write in a organic way. I do have some prompts in She Who Scrivens and also in the Shushat journal to really, you can actually write out why you want to write a book, why you're inspired, what you'd like the book to be about. You can just start asking yourself questions about it. I just think you need to start out gently and softly and without, hammering yourself over the head with a deadline or with a word count. if it's new, I think you just have to sort of get to know your writing process and let it evolve. And then you can start giving it parameters and structure and discipline. And some people are going to find that by sitting by a beautiful body of water, they can channel, an entire manuscript or poem or chapter. I find that sometimes. And some people are going to just be able to get about 50 words a day or 100 words a day, or just little bits and pieces that can become a book when tied together.
And you have your tips and formulas in your new book, She Who Scrivens. My guest, Laurie Sue Brockway, will be back with more of Laurie Sue after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
He was the heart of your family, and he taught you our history. He helped you fix your first flat. He was the best backyard DJ around. And every time he'd tell a story, he'd own the room. But now more than ever, he may feel alone. Today, older adults and their loved ones are struggling to connect in a time when connection has never been more important. But there is something we can do. Embrace our older loved ones through StoryCorps Connect. With StoryCorps Connect, you can honor seniors remotely with an interview about their life. Every interview will be archived at the Library of Congress, becoming part of American history, so that years from now, future generations can listen in.
All right, Grandpa, what's one piece of advice you have for me?
Just 3 words, sweetheart. Live with courage.
The man that had the best stories still has plenty of stories to tell. So connect virtually and share the conversation of a lifetime at storycorpsconnect.org/AARP. Connect, honor, share. StoryCorps Connect. A message from AARP, StoryCorps, and the Ad Council.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Laurie Sue Brockway. We're talking about her new book, She Who Scrivens. You share that writing is a spiritual process, not just an act of creation. What makes writing spiritual?
Well, I think it's a spiritual process for spiritual people. I know a lot of writers who would say that it has nothing to do with spirituality. It's discipline, it's deadline, it's, sit down, ass in the chair, get it done. And that is sometimes part of it, depending on how you operate and, what's the best way for you to create words and string them together into pages in a book. But I believe that spiritual people can respond well to a spiritual writing process, whereby they do things in their environment and in themselves that connect them to a greater source of inspiration. A lot of people think that we're just supposed to use our brains to come up with things. And of course, that's a very, very important part of writing. But we are also connected to divine source in many ways. And I think, to a lot of insight and wisdom and information. And if you treat your writing as a spiritual process, then it's going to be a lot easier to write a spiritual book, because people who are writing about spirituality are usually living it. People who write goddess books are usually people who love and worship the goddess or who work with goddess energy, and they're living it in their daily lives. And so you have to include that in your writing process. And I think also there are many spiritual things that you can do to enhance that experience, creating a writing altar, lighting candles, doing prayers, walking meditations, drawing, or doing, spiritual writing or coloring or something before you start your writing process, things that just sort of allow it to be spiritual and also connect you to a different part of your brain.
And you share many of these tips and techniques and inspirations in She Who Scrivens. So I've gotten a copy of your book. I've read it. I've digested it. I've embraced it in every possible way. And I've written 50,000 words of the greatest book that's ever been written. How do I get it published?
Well, if you're going to get it published through a publisher, you're going to have to start doing some research on the kind of publishers that are looking for the kind of book that you're writing. One of the ways you could do that is to look on Amazon on the bestseller list, or look under the category that you want to write in and see what publisher published it. And of course, the big publishers will require an agent. And in order to get an agent, you have to, begin that process of searching, and you have to query and send your book proposal. You will also need a book proposal to sell a book to most publishers, at least the big and medium size. And most publishers need a book proposal, which is basically, it's a whole process. I talk about it and outline it a little bit in She Who Scrivens, but it is an actual proposal. It has competitive analysis of different books in the market that are doing well, books that are similar to yours. And it usually has to have, if it's nonfiction, it has to have at least 2 chapters attached to it. So you want to, sort out if you want a traditionally published book, and if you're trying to go to a big publisher, you need an agent who knows who all the editors are, who knows what they're looking for. And if you want to, and if it's okay with you to go to like a medium-sized publisher or an educational or university press, sometimes you can, you have more of a chance to submit your own book proposal without an agent. And, there are companies that do spiritual books, Llewellyn and other companies. I don't exactly know what their rules are right now, but I believe that some of the smaller, well, Llewellyn's not that small, but some of the spiritual publishing houses will look at proposals without an agent. And, if you don't feel like you need a traditionally published book, you can self-publish it. And it is a lot of work and it's a bit of a process, but there are so many opportunities to publish books today. There are many books being published. So you also have to look at, is this a book that is like a book of your heart that you just need to get out there? Or are you thinking this is a book that's going to start a new aspect of your career, or that's going to solidify the work that you've been doing? I think it's important to look at what is important to you in terms of what you'd like to accomplish with a book, and then you can proceed. I've done it all different ways. I've had, a couple of I've had agents. Initial books I did, I just worked with the publisher directly. And now I'm mostly self-published. I'm just starting to work with some contracted books again. So it really depends, what you want. And also on the journey, it's like acting sometimes, getting a book published. You don't always get the big role at first. You don't always get the big book project. I will tell you that sometimes a first-time author has a better chance of getting a new book in there than somebody who's written 5 books, where, the last 2 haven't done that well, according to publishing standards. And also publishers like people that have very strong platforms and social media presence. And it used to be having publicity and media presence, and now it's social media, strong followings. So there's a lot of rules in traditional publishing.
And you offer a lot of steps in She Who Scrivens in terms of self-publishing.
Well, I think that self-publishing is such a viable option now that first of all, it takes traditional publishing 18 months at least to get out a book from start to finish. And, once they have it in hand. And if you want to get a book published tomorrow, you can actually, if you have it sitting on if it's ready, if it's formatted, if you've had a proofread, you have to get it edited and proofread and formatted, but then you can actually just put it on Amazon and you can test it. I mean, you want it to look good. You want to have a pretty cover, and you want to have an appropriate cover, and you want it to look professionally formatted. But I know people who still upload books as Word documents. I don't even have any understanding of how to do that because I always use a formatter. But it is, it's kind of, once you get used to it, it's a simple process. And I mean, I do it all the time now. And also, if you self-publish, you can change the manuscript. Yesterday, I just changed the book cover on a book that's been out for 2 years because I had a nicer cover done. You can control your writing destiny.
Do you have a special prayer that you use with Sheshat?
Ooh, I do. So here's an invocation to Sheshat as the divine mistress of writing and words. And this prayer is in the Sheshat journal. You can say this prayer or any prayer that connects you to her at the start of any writing or publishing activity. O wise one, the original one, creatrix of words, I honor you and call to you. Please bless me with your sacred presence today and always, and surround me with your inspiration. Bring me your scribal tools and talents. Let me be your emissary here on earth to bring forth your wisdom, your teachings, your spiritual guidance, and your love through the written word. Thank you for helping me write this book. Please sit with me as I sit at my computer, while writing in my journals, or as I jot down notes on paper. Help me catch each pearl of wisdom as it flows. Help me gracefully capture each soulful verse as it appears. Help me catch the words that flow to me on the winds, and those that tumble into my mind in the morning rush, and those that pop up as the random thoughts in the course of the day. Thank you for helping me write this book. Let me live in a world where good words flow like summer rain, and where lyrical sentences manifest at the tip of my pen, and where beautiful divine musings are part of each day. Let me feel the flow of ideas coming from you, beloved muse, beloved divine guide, beloved divine inspiration. Thank you for helping me write this book.
That prayer was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. My guest, Laurie Sue Brockway, my partner and my wife. Her book is called She Who Scrivens. Laurie Sue, please tell our listeners where they can get that book and all of your wonderful work and find out more about you.
All of my books are on Amazon and all major bookstores online. And they can find this book, She Who Scrivens, along with Shushat Journal and the Shushat Notebook, which are a part of the series, on my website at revlauriesue.com.
Laurie Sue, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this wonderful writing wisdom.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.